We are going to tell the story of the day Jesus died, which we call Good Friday. And we're going to tell it as recorded in the Gospel of John, who was written by John, one of Jesus' disciples. He was there that day. In John chapter 12, Jesus spoke about this day. And he said, "Now is the judgment of this world, and now will the ruler of this world be cast out. And I, when I am lifted up on the cross, I will draw all people to myself." And what he meant was the judgment of this world. God was going to judge all of the wrong, all of the bad things we have ever done and ever will do against him, against ourselves, against one another. But he would not judge us with the sin inside of us. He would place that judgment upon himself, upon his son Jesus, who willingly took it for us. And Jesus would cast out the ruler of this world, Satan, the evil one, the liar, the accuser. He would be cast out, and Jesus would be lifted up and draw all people to himself. This is the story of how this happened. And Jesus led them to the garden where they met often to gather together. Now Judas was one of his disciples, but Satan had entered Judas, and Judas had decided that he was going to betray Jesus and hand him over to those who wanted to kill him, the chief priests of the Jews. And so he led a band of soldiers with him into that garden to find Jesus. And when Jesus saw them, he said, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he said, "I am he." And at his words, the guards were filled with fear and they fell over. And Jesus said again to them, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he said, "I am he." "If you're looking for me, then take me, but let my friends go, because I have promised I would not lose any that the Father had given me." And at that, Peter drew his sword and he struck the ear of one of the guards named Malchus. And Jesus turned to Peter and said, "Peter, put your sword away. Put it back in its sheath. I am going to go willingly with these men and give my life. I am going to drink the cup that the Father has given me to drink." This was our plan all along. And Jesus went with them. And they took him to Annas' house, who was the father-in-law of the high priest. And they brought him in to question him. And Peter and John went with him. And since John knew the high priest, he was let in, and Peter waited outside. And so John went and spoke to the girl who manned the door, the servant girl, and asked her to let Peter in. And when she did, she looked closely at Peter and said, "Aren't you one of the followers of this man?" But Peter was scared, and he said, "I am not." And then he came in and warmed himself by the fire. And then Annas questioned Jesus, and Jesus said to him, "I have taught only in public in the synagogues. People have openly heard my teaching. Why don't you ask them what I have said?" And at that, one of the guards struck him in the face and said, "How dare you speak to the high priest like that?" And Jesus said, "If what I have said is not true, then bear witness about that. But if it is true, why do you strike me?" And then they took him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest, for further questioning. Now Peter was warming himself by the fire, and there was a man there also warming himself by the fire because it was cold. And he looked at Peter and he said, "Aren't you one of Jesus' disciples?" And Peter denied it again and said, "I am not." And then a third man came up and he said, "Yes, I saw you in the garden. You are one of Jesus' disciples." And this man was a relative of Malchus, whose ear Peter had cut off. And Jesus had healed that ear. And Peter, for the third time, denied knowing Jesus. And at that, a rooster crowed. Then Caiaphas decided that Jesus needed to be taken to the governor's house, to Pilate. And so they led him bound to Pilate's house. And they asked Pilate to come out because they did not want to become ceremonially unclean for the Passover. And so he came out of his house and he said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" And they said, "We would not have brought him to you if he had not done evil." And then Pilate said, "Well, why don't you judge him yourselves?" And then the Jews said, "We have a law that it is not lawful for us to kill anyone. We want you to." And people started to crowd around to watch this trial. And Pilate turned to Jesus and said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said to him, "Do you say this of your own accord, or because others have said this about me?" And Pilate said, "Am I a Jew? Your own people have handed you over to me." And Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were so, my servants would be fighting for me to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. My kingdom is not of this world." And Pilate said, "So, you're a king." And Jesus said, "You say I am a king. You say that I am a king. And for this reason I was born, and for this reason I have come into this world, to bear witness about the truth. And everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." And then Pilate said, "What is truth?" And then he turned to the crowd and said, "It is custom for me to release one of your own to you at the Passover. Do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews?" And they said, "No, not him, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. And then Pilate took him in. And the guards whipped him and flogged him and put a crown of thorns on his head and a purple cloak about him, making fun of him as a king. And then Pilate brought him out, wearing this crown of thorns and the purple cloak, with blood coming down his head, and brought him out in front of everyone and said, "Behold the man." And when the Jews saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And Pilate said, "You crucify him yourself." And they said, "We have a law, and according to that law, this man should die because he said that he was the Son of God." And this made Pilate very afraid. And he questioned Jesus, saying, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave no answer. And then Pilate said, "Do you not know I have authority to release you or to have you crucified?" And Jesus said, "You would not have any authority unless it were given to you from above." And then Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews said, "If you release this man, you are not a friend of Caesar. For anyone who calls himself a king opposes Caesar." And then Pilate found no guilt in Jesus and still sought to release him, brought him to the place of the stone pavement. And he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." And the Jews said, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" And Pilate said, "Should I crucify your king?" And the Jews said, "We have no king but Caesar." And then Pilate handed Jesus over to them to be crucified. And the soldiers took him and made him carry his own cross up the hill. And Pilate put a sign on the cross saying, "The King of the Jews." And the Jews saw it and read it and said, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but rather say, this man said he was the King of the Jews." And Pilate said, "What I have written, I have written." And then the guards took Jesus' clothes and cast lots for his clothes to fulfill what was prophesied about in Scripture. And then 3 women gathered at the foot of his cross: Mary, mother of Clopas, Mary Magdalene, from whom 7 demons came out by Jesus, and Mary, his mother. And Jesus looked down from the cross and saw John, his friend, and Mary, his mother. And he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." And then he said to John, "John, behold your mother." And from that hour, John took Mary home to take care of her. And then Jesus said, "I thirst." And so they found some sour wine and they fed it to him with a hyssop branch. And then he sighed his last and he said, "It is finished." All of God's judgment upon sin, the ruler of this world, Satan, was cast out. Jesus had finished rescuing us from sin. And he breathed his last and gave up his spirit and died.